Evolutionary.org Hardcore 2.0, episode 176 is coming your way. Today's going to be a warning. Dangers of AI coaching and developing cycles by Ultima. Today we're going to talk about what ChatGPT is, what is AI. We're talking about bad advice by AI, how it's fake info, how a
Yep,
robot or machine doesn't know steroids because it never injected it, why
yep.
AI advice is dangerous, and why Ultima is so good. But first, let me remind everybody we are on Spotify, we are on Apple. Someone was asking the other day about Spotify. I said, yeah, we're on there. I
Yep.
actually confirmed it yesterday. Every 2 days, they're putting up our podcast. So they're putting them up as fast as they can. So if you really enjoy these podcasts, you want us to continue doing this, you got to help us out. You got to
Yeah.
you got to sub, you got to put all that information out there. And you've got to, make sure you're commenting on our podcast, telling your friends and family so we can keep this going. The algorithm's got to pick it up. And then from there, we get more and more views and we can keep this podcast going. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to continue it. This is the only podcast out there in this field where we actually have a doctor go over our podcast and make sure it's been accurate. We cross check this. We have studies. We have citations on these podcasts. That is a requirement that we have. And if we do not have that, we do not start the podcast. We will actually stop the podcast before we even start it. So find me another podcast in this field that does it. No, they just sit around. They just start the podcast. 4 or 5 guys get together out of the blue. They sit
Yeah.
there smoking blunts and they talk bodybuilding with no references, no nothing. They never even read a book in their life. Okay. So if you want more podcasts like us to continue, you got to support us and keep us going. So let's get into this. What is ChatGPT and AI? So let me go over some background on this before I bring in
Yep.
Mobster.
Yep. 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 Yep.
And I had to look up what I'm not into this geeky stuff at all. So this AI and Chat GPT shit, I'm not, really, I don't know much about it. So I had to kind of research what it is. And look, AI stands for artificial intelligence. I even knew that, obviously. And what it
Yeah.
is,
Yeah.
it's a simulation of human intelligence processes by computer systems. It performs tasks that would be in years past require human intelligence. So back before we had access to calculators, people would have to sit down and write a complicated math equation, for example. So if I sit here and say, what is 2,525 times 20,538? Back in your day, Mobster, before calculators, you'd have to go up to the chalkboard and write it out and do the whole math, right?
Yeah. Just
Now,
about. Yeah. Yeah.
and then in my time, they came up with these really fancy ass calculators. I was required in high school and college to have one of these scientific calculators to do these complicated math
Mm.
equations for chemistry, math, any type of scientific stuff, whatever. And we had to basically purchase these expensive $40, $50 calculators. Now you can literally pick up your smartphone, pull up the
Yes.
chat GPT and talk into it and put in that equation, and it'll literally within seconds give you the answer. So that is basically what it's all about. It's a robot doing the math for you. So and look, it can also do other things. It can give you opinions and advice on certain things in the fitness world, including putting together cycles now, which is crazy, and
Yes.
we're going to talk about
Yep.
that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Nutritional advice and yeah, I'm losing my train of thought.
Yeah.
So
It's
workout
and training, Steve.
yeah,
Yes.
workout routines, more that
Yes.
would have required a personal trainer or a coach to do for you. So, look, at the end of the day, Chat GPT is one of the most popular options in the fitness industry, and it's a
Yep.
language model chatbot created by OpenAI. So, it's a dual entity organization, so it combines both for profit and not for profit together. Microsoft maintains control over Chat GPT, and its development and has contributed most of any company's investment. I think I came up with a number when I was researching. Microsoft is somewhere between 40 and 50% of the chat GPT. So they basically have a big hand in that. If you go on
Yep.
Google search engine, you could ask a question on Google search engine, anything you want, whether it's fitness related or anything else. And the AI technology that Google has will actually
Yes.
write out an answer. You can ask anything about your
Yeah. Yeah.
pet. You can ask anything.
Historically, Steve, one of the things that came up when they first developed ChatGPT was they had it in-house, and then they were kind of like released a beta version. And one of the things I read this the other day, and it's what made me think about this show as a topic as well, was people were able to search for things that perhaps arguably they shouldn't be allowed to search for, or the computer itself was creating bias that it shouldn't have a bias for. So, by way of example, these were horrendous bits of information. One specifically related to nuclear bombs. I think someone was just testing the AI and was able to say, how could I make a nuclear bomb? And this is one of those things that the FBI and various federal organizations really don't want people having access to that kind of information, especially with regards to terror and wars and politics and whatever. Just and of course the apocalyptic fucking scenarios that come with it. And yet they were getting pieces of information that perhaps shouldn't have been available, and ironically wasn't available via the normal type search engines for fairly obvious reasons. Different matter with different countries, different laws, whatever else. Pretty much the idea that you could create something that was the worst kind of bomb ever based on information that was freely available was just fucking mind-blowing. Then there was things like bias stuff or whatever else where there was racist elements that had crept in via the algorithm. And obviously this had been influenced consciously or unconsciously by the people that were putting the information together in the first place. So there was that one medical example, which was kind of weird, was that the AI was able to tell the ethnic origin between black and white, to put it crudely, from X-rays. And so they said, how the fuck has it been able to tell the difference? Where's it getting the information from? It was accurate. That was the weird part. So there, and then of course it then come down to, I think there was some element creeping in there with regards to medical insurance. And so that was again a kind of bias that seemed unnecessary for one reason or another. You know, there are certain, obviously, sickle cell anemia is a good example with people with West Indian in this country and African American, where that might be a medical issue and a medical insurance issue. But the idea that you would creep that bias into other elements was kind of fucked up. So that was just the developmental stuff. That was the experiment at the beginning. And obviously, being beta, there are going to be problems, but you get people to test these problems out. One of the things I said to Steve, and I'll just do this as a historical thing again, some years ago, people started, I won't say cheating, let's just say they were being creative, but bordering on cheating or lazy, arguably. And I've actually talked to people at universities in regard to this some years ago. So what started to happen with the initial early parts of AI is that students at certain universities, and it's all over the place, Steve, I'll say certain worldwide, were using AI to help them with their dissertations. And essentially this led to a couple of problems. Number one is that meant that they didn't necessarily actually understand the subject that they were talking about, because the AI created the words, 7,000, 8,000 word dissertation, whatever. And it also, the professors and the lecturers, being that little bit more qualified, started to notice this sort of repetitive aspect, which I'll get into a little bit, in the dissertations and the essays that they were receiving. In fact, the professors, just as clever, used AI to detect that the dissertation was written by an AI, not by the person, the student. And there was just a bunch of obvious things. And an example would be, we can quite often see videos on Instagram, on YouTube. Instagram's a good example, 5-minute, a 3-minute reel, and it'll be a dragon going up a high street, and you know it's AI. But equally, I've seen, I think, Ronaldo, the footballer, on a fitness page, AI created fitness page on Facebook with a very, very nice, almost realistic image of the very famous in very lean condition. And I believe there's a sort of originator picture that the image came from, but you could tell it was AI created, but it wasn't telling you that it was AI created. It was our human eye that could see that it wasn't quite right. I also have here 2 AI created books. You can go onto Amazon, and if you want, you can get AI to create a 400 or 500 word, 1,000 word, 2,000 word book that is printed on demand by Amazon on a subject, and it will do a nice graphic for the cover. It will use the Amazon print on demand template, and it will write 2,000, 4,000 words, whatever you want. Let's say a 20, 30, 100 page book. And I've got two of those, and it's so fucking obvious to me that it's been written by AI, and almost, which we'll get into as well, it's like the person that asked it to create it gave it a list of data, gave it some references. Please write me a 100 page book on Dorian Yates, and they're not bothered reading the actual book. And in fact, I've even seen there are videos on YouTube where people that do this for a living will find a hot topic, look what's hot on the algorithm, look what's coming up in terms of traction, have a book created on that subject, and we'll have 200 or 300 books on different channels, of different under different pseudonyms, names, etc. on Amazon. And then literally the AI has done 90% of the work, and all they've got to do is sell a few of these books every day, and they've paid for lunch, they paid their rent. And it doesn't matter that the book actually has zero value, is literally going over information that already exists, and is not being created in a unique or interpretive kind of way. And that's just in terms of the other aspects. Now, for our purposes, for today, what are we talking about today? And Steve and I are going to get into the specifics. I'll break it down into a couple of bits and pieces when we talk about bad advice by AI. So we're going to cover 3 kind of subjects, which is where, for now, because this is our focus of these shows, the information that we as human beings are putting out there. And there are AI created YouTubes where you can use the voice, Steve, working from a script, and you can literally sell your voice. And then that voice, that sort of way of you and I talking, can be used by AI to create a podcast using our voices. But you'll know again, if you listen to it after a few minutes, it's an AI created YouTube video. So our topics for today are, as Steve said at the beginning of the show, training, steroids, and nutrition. Let's start at the top, Steve. Let's start with just the training, because I think the steroids is a really, really hot topic for today. So yeah, let's talk about, as it says, training specifically, and this applies to probably all 3 subjects we'll be discussing today. Steve and I have done shows, and without meaning to sound too sort of hard on people, I suspect that the people that listen to this show do not form part of this kind of population, but go to any gym anywhere in the world, and specifically the big, well-known $10, $20 chain type gyms. And I'm thinking specifically of Planet Fitness, in this country, Pure Gym, and there's a bunch of other gyms in a similar thing, which are more, arguably, Steve, middle market, generic, franchise type gym. Limited square footage, a particular price point, arguably 24 hours and so on and so forth. They may, but rarely do, and I'm not being specific on those particular brands, but they very rarely would have hands-on staff that will take you through training. I don't think most of those allow PTs and so on and so forth. And even in my gym that I go to, and I'm sure that gyms that Steve goes to, if we're not focused on ourselves and our own workout for a minute and we look around, there will be people going through the motions, Steve. There will be people that aren't focused. There will be people that aren't pushing themselves, that could be better than they are. There will be people that train but don't eat well. There will be people doing exercises that you and I are like, what the fuck are you doing? And on occasion, I've even sort of made someone get more from an exercise. That's kind of good, but give them a little bit of an extra. But then there's other times when you go, why are their arms only going halfway up on their exercise? Why are they doing the exercise in a certain specific way? And so the argument then becomes down to the information that you've given to an AI versus the information that it gets hold of from the internet. And then those two things combined, giving it back to you in a way that a coach or PT or even someone like Stevesmi or myself would never do. It's not going to correct your form. It's only relying, as I said just now, on the information that you give it. Questions, for example, Steve, that perhaps should be asked. And let's give you an example. If you and I coach someone we quite often talk about medical history and background. And one of the things I spoke to Steve about in the pre-show was a Washington Post article specifically on why you shouldn't rely on ChatGPT for exercise information. And they use what they call a gold standard agreed within the industry, exercise industry, as the sort of questions that should be asked, the protocols that should be followed, and so on and so forth. And AI was in the experiment that they did, or they ran, 80% of the way there, but it wasn't asking all the questions. So, for example, if you don't tell ChatGPT that you have a medical issue, massive problem. If you don't, for example, say that you've got a restriction in your shoulder, then you've got a problem. You would need to ask this as a specific question, but did you include it in the original training protocol? What we're seeing, I think, Steve, and I'll bring Steve in for this now as well, is sometimes we're seeing the ChatGPT AI create wholesale complete training programs, what to do Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And I would ask in that scenario, does it have the complete knowledge based on the information that you've given it, Steve, for every single thing that you're doing in that training program? Or as we'll talk about with the other subjects, gone off, looked at good training programs that have been printed on Reddit, on YouTube, on Instagram, wherever, taken that information, this is a good training program, brought it back and applied it to you, when specifically that might not actually be the training program that you need. So what do you think about that, Steve?
So I brought up the example earlier about the math equation. Wouldn't it be wonderful if, you know, these AI technologies, in fitness was black and white? Okay, what's 2,538 times 20,578? That's a black and white answer. There's an answer to that, and there's a wrong answer to that. There's only one right answer to it. But in fitness, that's not black and white. Mobster brought his buddy on the podcast. We had a podcast a few months ago. He brought his buddy on, who is one of the top powerlifters in the world, and he has Crohn's disease. He's had Crohn's disease his whole life. He was on a specific diet. He's done three things: raw dairy, raw meat, or medium rare meat, and fasting. That's his protocol for powerlifting. And he's one of the most strongest powerlifters in the world. But here's the thing. These AI, ChatGPT, would never have put him on such a diet. But he had to figure out that diet through trial and error and trying different things. But if you put in what's a good diet for Crohn's disease, you could try that right now and try it on the AI. It's not going to tell you to do those three things. So, why are we listening to a robot and not listening to ourselves? He figured out a way to conquer his Crohn's disease and to get it under control by figuring out things to do. But what he's doing is not going to work on other people. Other people may have to follow a different diet. Other people may not be able to consume dairy. If I consume one drop of dairy, I'll be on the toilet with diarrhea. I can't consume dairy, but he can because he has different genetics. He has Northern European. A lot of Northern Europeans have a much easier time consuming dairy products. If you're more from Asia, Africa, Middle East, Mediterranean, you're going to have a much harder time digesting dairy. So a lot of this, when it comes to this AI and ChatGPT, is just not going to work. And, I could put in right now, what is the best diet for Crohn's disease? I'm putting it right now into Google. You guys hear me typing, right? And it comes up, I got it right here. It says a well-balanced, healthy diet can help manage and improve overall well-being. The Crohn's and Colitis Foundation recommends a Mediterranean-style diet for people with IBD, which includes plenty of fruits, vegetables, whole grains, lean protein, healthy fats. Wrong. He says he doesn't consume a single fruit or vegetable. He doesn't consume a single amount of fiber. Yet the AI off of Google literally just typed it in, says that you should be eating fruits and vegetables. Wrong. Too much fiber with someone with Crohn's can actually kill you. If someone with Crohn's takes psyllium husk, you can get stopped up and literally die, have to get rushed to a hospital. So how could it be so fucking inaccurate? Because what it's doing is it's basically parroting some organization on what some
Yes.
organization thinks,
Yes.
but that organization is not in fitness, and they don't have they're not,
Yeah,
the ultimate.
they don't know who the hell Mark is. They
Yeah.
don't know what Mark's specific issues are.
They don't know
And if
his
Mark,
his his
yeah,
ancestry, his genetics. They
his
don't know that.
history,
Yeah.
exactly,
It
yes.
doesn't mention anything about dairy on this. It doesn't mention that he should consume dairy. Literally, he consumes dairy. It doesn't mention that he should consume red meat. And it says on here, oh, you should only eat chicken, turkey, fish, eggs, and tofu. It doesn't mention anything about red meat, yet he eats red meat. Doesn't mention a thing about fasting on here.
Yep,
Not a fucking thing about fasting, but he's fasting and having success. So this is a perfect example how this is completely 100% wrong compared to what he did. And
yeah,
and this is it. This is real life. A robot is black and white. A robot is you do it this way or you do it this
yeah,
way.
yeah,
But
yeah.
that's not fitness. Fitness is completely different, and everybody's going to be completely different.
Absolutely, Steve. If I look, and I've talked about the history of bodybuilding, I've got my massive physical culture, bodybuilding, weightlifting, strongman collection upstairs. And I've talked about how back in the day, average Joes would wait for the latest article of a magazine to come out. And that men's fitness is an example. So not even bodybuilding, just men's fitness. And it would be like the latest ab workout routine. Okay. And, guaranteed to work in 6 weeks. That's the titles that they used to have. They can't say guaranteed anymore for obvious reasons. But people would literally change their training profile on a monthly basis because the latest routine had come out. And it was wrong for a couple of reasons. And AI would still rely on the same information, Steve. Here's the problem. So this is training again. The routine was meant to be the routine that a champion bodybuilder had used to bring up his arms. So let's imagine that that was actually true, because a lot of the time it was not. You do not have that champion bodybuilder's genetics. You might be restricted. I can't supinate my right arm or my left arm all the way over like I used to be able to do when I was younger. So I'm not going to be able to do the perfect concentration curl. I could probably do a very nice concentration curl, but it would not, it would be like a 9 out of 10, Steve. It wouldn't be a 10 out of 10. So, I cannot, I've never seemed to benefit from, and if anybody looks at my logs on the forum would know this, my approach to volume is incredibly low. When I increase the volume, it is a matter of more repetitions per set with pretty much the same number of sets as before. And most of the people on the forum, if they did my training program, would either be super stressed by the ridiculous weights I'm doing or not at all stimulated, even if they moderate the weights in terms of how much muscle they can build using my training routine. But it works for me. So another issue with those magazine articles, and again, this is the same principle with the AI, was that not a lot of the time they were ghost written. So it might have Mr. Joe Blow, the latest Mr. America, as the centerpiece, the picture. Joe does this arm routine, says Tom. Tom would be the writer. Tom did not have championship genetics, but he was a fucking good writer. Joe Wheeler was a fucking good writer, but he was a mediocre bodybuilder. So imagine then that AI goes in and scans my whole bodybuilding magazine collection, especially all the stuff in the 50s, the 60s, and the 70s, Steve, and uses that to create a massive database, because this is essentially how it works, of all the information of every arm routine at any of my American bodybuilding magazines. Let's say that's 3,000 bodybuilding magazines, stuff that started from 1980, but I've got stuff all the way back to 1900. And use those templates, use those examples, none of which, or very few, like a fraction of a percentage of which, would have actually have any scientific data that had been studied in any meaningful way to produce the template for our listener going on to ChatGPT and using the information to create an arm routine, for example, as I used in the earlier magazine example. It wasn't written by the pro. It was written by a good writer who had mediocre genetics. It was kind of, let's just be honest, Steve, made up. And some people that did the arm routine would have benefited from it, but most would have struggled if they tried to do a professional level of volume without perhaps asking the genetics, the steroids, or the food, or the lifestyle. So ChatGPT and AI and all AIs rely on the information that's available to them. And in terms of, you've got two ways that information comes to you. Number one is that stuff that's out there on the internet, again, Steve and I have talked about this. It's an enormous amount of bro science. It's an enormous amount of people putting their arm routines on the forums, on the Reddit, onto Twitter, onto whatever. And this, and even sometimes this has been written just for that channel, that particular medium. It's not necessarily even the routine that the person's actually using, and so on and so forth. And then it's going through all of that data and cherry picking the information, perhaps looking at everything and just coming up with an average and presenting to you, quote unquote, as the perfect arm routine based on 10,000 pieces of information, 10,000 different articles, 10,000 different references. Now, you might be, as I said, Steve and I think I'm probably about a foot taller than Steve, all things being equal. What works for Steve doesn't work for me, and vice versa. Therefore, the perfect routine that ChatGPT has just created for us might not work for either of us. It might work for someone who's somewhere in the middle, Steve. And then that's without the information that you give, you, the individual. If you don't put in your data, as an example, Steve, in the gym yesterday, and I had a good long chat with this guy last week, as a young Asian student, I believe, at college or university, and I had a long conversation, 15, 20 minutes at least, when I should have been doing other shit last Monday. On grip stuff and building his forearms up for his Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And my wrist measurement, because I measured his wrist, his forearms and his biceps while we were having this whole conversation, his wrist was 5 fucking inches, Steve. Mine used to be an 8 1/4, and I was actually surprised that my wrist has got bigger. I'm now 8 3/4, which is relatively large. I think his forearm was, I'm going to say, 9 or 10 inches. He wasn't super skinny, but he wasn't far off of it. And then his upper arm, I think, was something like 13 inches, which is actually kind of muscular, all things being considered for his size, etc. But there was a lot more size in there. I think my forearm is 16 and a half without a pump. And my right upper arm, which measured for his as well, there was, I think, like a fucking close to, I think, 20 inches, there or thereabouts. So I'm doing 90 kilo hammer curls. I think he was using 10 kilos, maybe 12 and a half kilograms. What works for me doesn't work for him. What would apply to me wouldn't apply to him. So the information needs to be things like, what's your wrist size? What's your forearm size? What's your bicep size? How many years have you been training? If the AI is not asking you these questions and you're not giving it information, then what is it going to give you back? Is it going to give you a beginner's arm routine, an intermediate? Do you take steroids? Do you eat well? Do you rest well? Do you have any medical issues with your elbow, your shoulder, your wrist, and so on and so forth? So you absolutely need you to put in as much information as possible. And we see this occasionally on the forum when we touch upon nutrition and steroids as well as training, Steve, where someone will come on and say, is this a good routine? And I've actually argued this in simple terms. Years ago, I would say, oh, no, you should be doing this because this is what this is. But now I say, does this routine work for you? Is you doing what you do sufficient to stimulate size and muscle? Is it making you leaner if that's what you want? Is it making you more muscular if that's what you want? If it isn't, then you need to change it. That comes down to steroids, that comes down to training, that comes down to nutrition. If the thing isn't working, then it needs to be fixed. If so, it's again that template. Does AI, for example, change the training program if it's not working? Do you realize that the information you give it was wrong or insufficient, so that it gave you the information based on 10,000 data points, but not, unfortunately, the information that you actually needed? And so the people need to understand that. We see, and I've seen a couple of examples, this is in specifically training logs. This just happened a couple of days ago, Steve, where someone created, using ChatGPT, they said specifically that's what they've done, a reference for their training data, meaning they'd inputted some information in there, and then it created something that could be posted onto the forum. And this was a human being that had done it. It's not an AI-created training log, thank goodness. But when you read it, pretty much every person that read it and commented on it realized it was AI created. And the reason for that was it was repetitive. There was an introductory paragraph. The person had actually kind of introduced, this is the reason why I'm doing what I'm doing. And then that information was repeated again, a second time, and then lower down a page a third time when it was unnecessary. And it was as though the AI has kind of wanted to reiterate something in a way that a human would have understood wasn't required, and that every single person reading it realized was AI created. And the part of that problem there is that the information had been taken as a given by the individual looking at what the AI created, and they hadn't checked that it made sense. They hadn't checked how it was written. And so if you start to think like that, that's a little bit like the AI issue, Steve, with Tesla cars some years ago with the self-driving technology. And the warning was essentially that you should at all times have your feet somewhere near the pedals and your hands somewhere near the steering wheel, ideally resting on the steering wheel, resting on the pedals. But the car would, for the most part, drive along. And you should, as much as possible, still be paying attention to what's going on. And of course, there was several small, one of dramatic crashes. And the crashes happened, for example, where a silver-sided truck was crossing it in front of the car, and because it was silver-sided, it was reflecting the blue sky and the grey road, and the car didn't realise that that wasn't sky and that wasn't road. The road wasn't clear and drove into the side of the truck. It's fine for the car to tell you that you're going over the lines and keeping the lane technology and so on and so forth. But if you can't recognize that that's the side of a truck, which a human eye would have done on a clear, sunny day, then you have the danger of relying on AI. If you don't check the information, if you don't give it sufficient information, and this applies to the other two, which we're going to talk about, then you are over relying on something that you need to check. You need yourself, like those dissertations that I mentioned earlier, to go back and actually read all the way through the information that you're looking at that's been presented for you, the 5,000 word, the 300 word log entry, whatever. You need to go back and read it and see if it makes sense to your human brain, because the computer can put together certain bits of information, but it doesn't necessarily understand a subject. Like Steve said with the Crohn's example, it doesn't understand that the information might be broadly correct, but isn't specifically correct. So if Mark, using the example that Steve gave again, asked for a recommendation, there is no way on earth that he would not be ill, Steve, and incapable of training or world-class deadlifting, etc., using the information that AI had come up with. If he literally said, I'm going to go away without checking, and obviously his human brain knows that he couldn't use that diet, and just applied the diet as written, he would be ill. He would arguably, Steve, be in hospital. And he's literally just come back out of hospital for a reason that we can talk about on another show. But that would be dangerous in example. And so, for example, again, with the training stuff and even the Washington Post article that we referred to earlier on, as an example, again, Steve, we have here in the NHS, and you probably have similar in the States. You can ring up, I think it's called an NHS, so it's not a 999 or a 911 number. It's like a non-emergency number. You ring up, and there is a person answers the telephone, speaks to you, and asks for your symptoms, but they take those symptoms and they put that into a system. And the system essentially works on yes or no answers. Are you bleeding out of your arse? Yes or no? Or well, then it's not a rectal issue. I'm feeling very feverish. The patient says they feel very hot. And essentially it's a yes and no thing all the way through. And at some point, it should red flag. If it's a serious illness, it should red flag that you need an ambulance, a paramedic right fucking now, as soon as possible. And you should be prioritized if you're red flag. But there are obviously a reliance on the system, which one would hope is be completely looked at and updated constantly, of even the operator at some point. For example, Steve, if the person rings up and they're incredibly breathless, but it's for another reason, or it appears to be another reason. If they wasn't breathless, the information given and the way that they're talking might lead to a wrong decision. Whereas they ring up and they sound like they're having an asthma attack, or they can barely get the words out, or they're stuttering or they're slurring their words, then even without asking the questions, the operator is going to know straight away that there's an issue. And this is the difference again between AI and human beings. Instantly recognizing. Let me give you one more example, and then I think we should talk about specifically steroids, Steve. So, example, I was telling the guys in the gym yesterday, I said we're doing this AI podcast on Tuesday. You go to the doctor, and I told Steve this in the pre-show, and you go to the doctor because you've got a rash on your forearm. So this is again AI. You only ask AI about the rash on your forearm. I have a rash on my forearm. What cream should I rub on it? And if it was like dry skin or something like that, you might say vitamin E cream is great for dry skin. You should try vitamin E cream. If you go to the doctor might know that you're allergic to the creams or what's in the creams as well as the vitamin E. He might notice that you've got other things going on, that you're breathless, that your eyes look glazed, that you're jaundiced, that your face is very pale, and the dry skin on your forearm might be the least of your problem. But a human being, the doctor, the MD, would instantly see that the moment you walk in the fucking room, Steve. So again, that's a question of information. What you tell the AI and the questions that the AI are asked before it produces a response versus what a human being would spot in a second. A coach creating you a training program would ask you what you want to get into shape for, but would also notice that you walked in with a limp. So you've got a dodgy knee. You didn't mention the knee or your ankle or you're bow-legged. You might have a vitamin D deficiency. And again, if you're not inputting that information, if you're not asking the right information, and not even just the idea of an AI using averages, that's using 10,000 data points, it might look at 1,000 healthy individuals and come up with an average for those 1,000 healthy individuals in terms of a training program versus what you need. One example, we've done shows, or should I say Evolutionary has done shows years ago, Steve, on the certain very tiny percentage of bodybuilders that were using injectable oils. And we know, because we've seen them on social media, I think mostly in Brazil, got a plus I've seen one or two from elsewhere, but there was a percentage of South American Brazilians in Rio de Janeiro or whatever that were injecting oils into their arms in a freaky, oh my God, what was he thinking kind of way. And we've seen protocols on how to inject these oils. We've seen subjects and products that are injectable oils and so on and so forth. But there will always be a small percentage that perhaps shouldn't be using those injectables because they have some sort of incredibly skewed body dysmorphia or borderline mental illnesses. The problem is that they would have access to the same information and be able to input, well, what's the best injectable oil? How do I inject it to my biceps safely? And make their arms 28 inches when their neck is 12 or their legs are 13. And you and I would go, don't fucking do it, you mad bastard. But the AI might not necessarily say that. So you have to look at all the aspects. Let's talk a little bit now, Steve. I'll bring Steve back in for this when it comes to specifically steroids, Steve, and the idea of an AI creating a steroid cycle.
Yeah, and I tried this out with Chat GPT, and I put it in. I said, what is a good first cycle for a newbie? And Chat GPT came up with a first cycle. And this is one that they came up with. I said it was a person who's been training for 3 years. I didn't mention their age. I didn't mention their stats. I didn't mention anything except that they've been training for 3 years and have been completely natural prior. So the Chat GPT came up with testosterone NFA or testosterone cypionate, 300 to 500 milligrams a week, split into 2 to 3 injections per week. Also said that testosterone is the base for most cycles. It also said to add an AI only if necessary and to run the cycle for 8 to 10 weeks. Then it recommended a PCT using Clomid 50 milligrams a day and Novadex 20 milligrams a day for 4 weeks. So I'll go over a couple things that's right and wrong of this. First of all, you don't
Crack on,
know.
Steve. Crack on. I can think of those right now. You
Yeah.
tell the listeners. Yeah.
So first off, a first cycle, it just a lot of things. You don't have to run testosterone as a first cycle. You don't have to run testosterone as a base. If you are prone to estrogen issues, and you go on this cycle and you follow what it's saying to you only using AI only if necessary, you could end up with gynecomastia bitch tits. You could be looking at a $12 or $15,000 bill to get that gynecomastia removed. You could be looking at having problems with blood pressure, insomnia, all kinds of side effects, domino effect of side effects of having high estrogen. Also, running the cycle 8 to 10 weeks. If you're running testosterone cypionate, it's not even going to reach peak levels before 5 or 6 weeks. So, really, let's say you do 8 weeks with testosterone cypionate, you're only going to be on it for 2 or 3 weeks at peak levels. So, that's completely asinine right there. You're going to have to run it at least 10, 12 weeks. Then it says for PCT, Clomid 50 milligrams a day and Novadex 20 milligrams a
Yeah.
day.
Is that
What
it? Yeah.
happens? Yeah, what happens if you are sensitive to either one of these serums? Some people can't handle Clomid, some people can't handle Novadex without getting some really bad side effects.
Oh my God.
There's just too many. This isn't black and white. So basically, what they're doing here is they're basically setting up just a cookie cutter parroted
Yeah. Because
cycle in
that's
PCT.
thousands of cookie cutter examples out there for it to really to
Yeah.
use as a source for the information, Steve. And we would piss that in 2 seconds. Listen, you come on the forums, you're a new member, you create a post, a thread. I want to do this cycle. Is it a good idea? And sometimes they'll put in the height, the weight, they might even guess the body fat levels, but they might not mention the age. So I'll start by saying you forgot to include your age. Lo and behold, it doesn't get mentioned, or they do mention it. And it might be someone who's 18. We had one very young example, obviously removed very quickly for just ethic reasons. You might be someone that's massively overweight in their 50s. That you cannot instantly say that that's the best protocol for that person. First cycle, like Steve said, but what's the aim of the cycle? There's no. Steve asked the question, and he didn't say that the person was lean, fat, muscular, old, young, whatever else. So again, that information is not there. There's no mention, for example, in the PCT of using a testosterone booster, the benefits of using certain products on cycle as well as off cycle. There's no other vitamin or supplement recommendations in there. There's no indication of the importance. And I have seen this occasionally mentioned by AI, but there's no indication of the importance of the training or the nutrition. We have seen, and again, human beings, we spot this information coming back from someone. For example, Steve, occasionally we'll get someone that this a approved source, and I only gained 5 pounds. Motherfucker, that's brilliant. That's a fantastic gain. You do that a couple of times a year, that's 10 pounds. 3 times a year, if it's a short enough cycle, that's 15 pounds. 15 pounds of new muscular tissue in a year is amazing. But if you relied on the information from the generic thing like that cycle that Steve just mentioned, you would come up with a huge number of reference points for people complaining about not becoming Mr. Olympia, or people complaining they didn't put on 20 pounds because I thought I was going to put on 20 pounds. We would point out that they didn't diet properly, the nutrition was really, really bad, their training was piss ass. You're not going to become 300 pounds squatting 100 pounds. You're not going to get 300 pounds if you're eating the same amount of food that you had before the cycle, and so on. And so, and if the AI doesn't give you that kind of information, what the hell? A great example is Steve mentioned the testosterone base. Steve and I have done at least 2 or 3 shows. You do not need to have testosterone as a base, but that parodied a million times. What about, and you and I have talked about this, Steve, there are protocols that we've discussed where there are steroids that I've used and got almost no, I would actually say not almost, I've had 0 response to when I know that the source is good. And I've had responses to other protocols that have worked for me fantastically well, but they won't work fantastically well for me forever. So I could ask AI to create a 6th or a 10th cycle, and it might find 500 or 600 data points on those 6th or 7th cycle that someone's done. But again, you need to be specific. If a person comes on and said, this is my first cycle, let's look at a photograph of you to see what condition you're in. Right, instantly a human eye is drawn to the hips or the love handles. or their bingo wings on the backs of their arms or whatever. They might be massively obese. They might be vastly underestimating their body fat. Sorry, sir, you're more like 30%, but I think I'm only 20%. And that's the information they gave the AI. Should they then be using a wet drug like Dynapol, Steve? If they're 30% body weight, and in the example that Steve gave, wait until there's an issue with the AI, but they're massively overweight, and they then use a drug that's incredibly watery and like to cause estrogen issues and water retention, what the fuck's going to happen to their blood pressure, Steve? Can you go back to the AI and bitch? That drug protocol you told me was absolute fucking rubbish. My blood pressure's through the roof. I had to go see the doctor. Uh, I've got bitch tits. As Steve said, I'm down $20,000 or whatever. Of course you can't. It relied on the information that you give it. Human beings, Steve and I, and the members that help and assist with these kind of protocols on the forums would instantly recognize from a photograph. Some people don't like to put pictures up, Steve, because they're covered in tattoos or they're very identifiable. Fine. But if you can put up a picture, we would instantly see, for example, that you're not doing a pose properly. For example, that you are what's called skinny fat. You've got skinny arms, skinny legs, but you've got a bit of a paunch. Your posture might be horrendous. And you might be doing, I see an exercise, just as on the exercise side of it, Steve. The number of people that do back exercises, specifically rowing type exercises, but with their shoulders forward, almost rounded back, a pigeon chested kind of position versus pulling their delts back and putting their chest up and high. And I've literally had people stand. I said, "Can I help you for a second?" And I've had them do a back pose, but with their shoulders forward. And I said, "Where's the contraction? How much of a contraction you're getting?" And then I've had them pull their shoulders back and do the rowing movement again. And I said, "Now feel the contraction. When you pull your elbows back, when you get your shoulders back, and then pull your elbows back with a kind of arch back, leaning backwards slightly, with your chest high, the contraction in your lats is that much better." And it's literally just changing their posture. And then you can look around the gym and see people doing rows, specifically seated rows and certain lat exercises. People that are new to the gym, Steve, and I'm thinking specifically women, doing a very, very lightweight on the lat pull down machine, and it's halfway down their rib cage. It's not being pulled to the neck or the top of the chest. It's literally past their sternum, almost to their belly. And you think, what the fuck are you doing? You'd never chin up like that. You'd never do a pull up like that. That's not how it's done. No one showed them how to do the exercise. And again, that might have been a recommendation. So, yeah, just on the last thing again, Steve, when it comes to steroids, especially, right, we will ask about your experience. We will not want to know your condition. We will especially want to know your aims. And we've touched upon, and I'll bring Steve in for this, where people have seemed to have made up a steroid stack based on what they have available, which used to be very much a thing back in the day, versus what's actually the right thing to do and where they can get good products and how they can put them to the perfect cycle for their aim, but also based on where they are. So talk about the kind of difference between you, for example, Steve, and an AI creating a cycle for someone like one of our listeners.
So one of the things that you guys got to realize too, it's trial and error. And some of you are going to like certain steroids, some of you are going to not. And also over time, what you like is going to change, what your goals are. I've when I first started weight training, I didn't know what I was doing. I just was lifting weights. Then, I got more structured. I started focusing more on Olympic style training. I competed in that. Then I went from doing that to doing more endurance training in my 20s. Then from that, I went back to bodybuilding. I started focusing on bodybuilding. Then from that, I went back to powerlifting. So look, the AI is not going to understand all this. They're not going to understand the difference between which steroids you should use when you're doing powerlifting versus bodybuilding versus endurance training versus this versus that. It's really bad information because a lot of steroids out there, if you check with AI, and I've done this, if you check with AI or Chat GPT, it's going to say, "Oh, steroids are wonderful for endurance." Oh my goodness. Ben Johnson ran Winnie when he won the Olympia. He wasn't just when the on the Olympics. He wasn't just on Winnie. He may have used it. He may have got busted for it, but that wasn't what he was on. He was on other stuff. At the end of the day, if you run Winstrol GPT and AI is going to tell you, oh, windshield is great for sprinting. It's great for running, but it's not. It's going to give you these incredible pumps in your legs. You're going to realize that when you run it, how bad it is. But then you go on.
Steve, one example, which we've talked about loads of times, and this will come up with AI, is the animal vegetarian use steroids versus human use steroids. And you've corrected that information multiple times, but AI would not. So use that as an example as well. EQ and trend being the
Yeah,
obvious
and if you
example.
check with, AI or Chat GPT, they're going to tell you, oh, EQ and Trend, those are vet steroids. They're not vet steroids. They were using humans. EQ was using humans 25, 30 years. Trenbolone under parabolin was actually a human grade sold out of France. Negma was the company was the company that sold it for bodybuilders. Literally, bodybuilders were buying pharmacy grade parabolin. So, but if you check with the AI or Chat GPT, because they parrot it's basically the sheep mentality. They parrot the sheep mentality online. Example, trend is a base. You already talked about that. Trend should be the base of every cycle. AI will say that because that's the parity. That is the conventional wisdom. That is what the mainstream says. That's accurate. And look,
Yeah.
testosterone at the end of the day, it's the testosterone SIP and testosterone E are number one, number two most sold injectable
Yes.
steroids. That is true,
Yes.
but that doesn't
Yes.
mean that it has to be the base. I've had clients that have run literally 100 or 120 milligrams a week of testosterone who are lean. They're not overweight. They've had no history of estrogen problems, but even if they run just 100 milligrams, they'll start getting itchy nipples within days on them.
Yeah.
So are they supposed to run testosterone if they're getting itchy nipples and they're getting estrogenic side effects? No. And another
No.
thing that these robots are not going to know is uh, it's dangerous to listen to the robots. What if someone in this example where it's telling you what's a good first cycle, what if someone has a history of heart attacks, hypertension,
Yes.
heart
Yes.
issues, liver issues, kidney
Yes.
issues? You're gonna put
Edema.
you're
Yeah.
gonna put this guy in the hospital with a stroke or heart attack. You're gonna put this guy in the hospital on dialysis because he blows out his kidneys by the time he's 50 years old. So this is not, you cannot listen to a robot. You cannot listen to a
Some
machine when it
on
comes to your health.
forums over the years, Steve, on forums over the years, and it's almost a sort of joke, and we know it's a joke when we see it. I've used the phrase, and I repeat the phrase, "Trend is gold, trend is God," and I used to see that a lot. It's actually calmed down a little bit recently, and it's those people that are on trend that know just how effective a drug it can be. Where we also know just how many side effects and people struggle with trend. Now, if the AI recognizes 500 data points for trend is gold, trend is God, and only recognizes 300 data points, and this is just as an example, an analogy, for the side effects, then you could say, is trend the best steroid ever? And if it goes to the wrong source of information or it relies on people being vocal, tongue in cheek and taking the piss a little bit about just how goddamn effective trend is, then it might what turn around and say trend is the best steroid ever. I mean, just do it. We'll move on a little bit here, Steve, into talking about Ultima products. Now, I'll just use this as an analogy here. So we'll start with orals. Steve and I both kind of like or have liked at some point Dynabol, Anavar, but we've also, Steve specifically, is not a huge fan of Superdrol. So, for example, back in the day, and we're only talking about 20 or so years ago, Superdrol would have been a massive talking point on forums because it was legal. And again, you can still buy Ultima Superdrol right now. But the reason why it was a huge talking point back in the day is because it was a legal over the counter. It was thrown in generically with pro hormones, but it was never a pro hormone, it was an actual steroid. Whereas, and something else as well, Steve, that we talked about, the sensation or how you'll feel on steroids, which will never be understood. So, for example, if I use Ultima Dynabol, Steve, 30 to 50 milligrams a day, let's say 30 milligrams has always worked well for me for 4 to 8 weeks. I will blow the fuck up, which is great. I don't actually mind that. But also, and Steve and I have talked about this, how good do we feel? What's that sense of well-being that can come using Ultimate Debol, Steve, versus, for example, the pumps and how bad they can be. And there are ways, of course, of dealing with that using the very effective 30 to 50 milligrams a day for 4 to 8 weeks of Anavar. Now, I love Anavar for strength, but the pumps can be a pain in the arse, more in the shins or the glutes, etc. But certainly can be hard to work with unless you know what you're doing. And again, that comes from experience. So talk about the ultimate products that you've used. Some you would recommend personally, some you know work for others versus don't work for you. I, for example, would love Ultima Cypionate, Steve, for my TRT, but I've said on many shows that in fact, for whatever reason, when it comes to a steroid stack for strength, didn't work for me when I knew damn well that the same source, the same product, the same dosage was being used by buddies, and they absolutely loved it. So talk about ultimate products that you like, including injectables, and the difference between you and me, for example,
Yeah,
or other listeners.
we already talked about testosterone. A couple of the most popular orals that Ultima has is Dianabol, which would be great for bulking, and Anavar, which would be great for cutting. And those would be simple. You could do Dianabol anywhere from 10 to 50 milligrams a day. You can do the Anavar from anywhere from 25 to 50 milligrams a day as a male. And females who are listening to this, or if you have a female that's interested, she can run
Yep.
Anavar somewhere between 5 and 10 milligrams a day. Completely a good option for a female. When it comes to
Yep.
injectables, two of the most popular injectables would be Equipoise. If you're looking to do some lean muscle mass, bulking, it's
Yes.
good for
Yes.
endurance. It's very versatile. You can cut it with it as well, recomp, but a lot of people like to do some lean to moderate bulking with Equipoise. Very, very popular option. And then on the other side of it, you go from an equipoise, which is a testosterone derivative, to masteron, which is a DHT derivative. And masteron would be great for hardening, increasing vascularity, and for cutting. And that would be a good option. Of course, you want to make sure with masteron you are stacking it because solo, it's not going to really do much for you. So those are the top two orals and top two injectables aside from testosterone that Ultima sells, and they are
Let me give
very,
you an
very
example.
good.
Yes. Let me give you an example of an AI issue here, Steve. We know that Ultima has some great blends where the product's been put together for you. We also know, because we see this on the forums, some people like single source. They like the flexibility. They can take something in and out. We've actually talked about this where we had our show where we specifically discussed the idea that you could be flexible on cycle. And again, an AI is not allowing for that flexibility. It's doing the kind of stuff that I used to do when it came to training protocols and steroid protocols. It wouldn't necessarily allow for you having issues through the product. The product from Ultima might be absolutely fabulous, but it's just not working out for you, and you need to change your approach. So you need to know that stuff. You as a human being, and the people that are going to assist you on the forums as human beings, absolutely know that I'm running this, it's not working, I'm having terrible side effects, guys. Should I change my? Yes, absolutely. If it's not working for you, remove it. Get the fuck away from it. Do this instead. Stop this. Lower the dose. That's another one, Steve. People doing certain things where the doses, they put together something, the coaches recommended it, but the dosages are far too high, and we will absolutely change that. So we would recommend a company like Ultima because we know their products are fabulous, but we would be flexible in our approach, and we would tell you where you've gone wrong and allow you to make changes where perhaps AI would not. So keep that in mind. Ultima as a brand, Steve, talk about Ultima as a brand for the listeners and why we talk about companies like them as approved sources.
Yeah, and Ultima, what I like about Ultima is the prices are fantastic. They have a really good business model where they're able to sell a lot of their products in bulk. So basically, the more you buy, the more you save with them. They usually have some excellent promotions going. So you can really, really load up for 2, 3 cycles ahead of time and save a fortune and use that extra money to either buy more of their products, or you can use that money on your nutrition and your gym membership and all the other stuff you have to do in this game, supplements or whatever. So one of the things about Ultima that is fantastic is their price, their promos, but also the high quality of their products. So um, their products have been tested, they've been vetted to the fullest degree. They have outstanding service and fast shipping. When you order from them, you can expect high quality. You're going to get the most out of your cycles, and that's all we ask for. Some of these products that they sell, like the Anavar, the Primo, the growth hormone. We didn't get a chance to talk about the Primo and growth hormone that they have, but these are highly faked compounds. The Primo being an anabolic steroids and the growth hormone being a peptide, but these are very highly faked compounds out there.
Yep.
But Ultima, you don't have to worry about when you buy from Ultima. Not only are you getting an outstanding price, but you know you're getting a legitimate product. So finish out the
Yep.
podcast, Mobster, by talking more about Ultima and your experience with
I
Ultima.
just I was thinking the following, Steve, and I'm going to especially talk about Ultima as well. I was thinking if someone knows how to manipulate the algorithm, and some people do, or how to optimize their site, can you imagine using AI to get a source for steroids? There are people that can create a website in a day and put up fake images and take your money and run within a week and take tens of thousands of dollars off of people. And that can be done now. If you was able to manipulate the information that an AI is going to hook into, and you'll get the AI to recommend your company, your products, then that's the worst thing. Never mind the other things we've spoken about. So listen, there's reason why Steve said when we talk about ultimism. Literally, when Steve said they've been tried, they've been tested, that is 100% accurate. We could talk about other forms, but we talk about our own sites and Evolutionary specifically when we do this show. And you can come onto Evolutionary and you can search for Ultima and you can find human beings that have used their products. You can find examples of people on our forums that have used their own money to go away and have random products, different products from different approved sources, including Ultima, tested. Or they've done a cycle and they wasn't this or they wasn't that for some reason, and they went away and found that the product was 100% legit. So it must have been something else that was mad with the cycle. Did they use AI? Was they not eating enough? Did they train like an idiot? Was their expectations too high? They gained 3 to 5 pounds of muscle, but they thought they were going to gain 7 or 10 pounds because my mate did. No, look, a human being can go and look at the Ultimate products right now, Steve, and see quality just in the presentation. A human being can search, like I said, on the forums and realize that this is not an AI created log. It's a human being who's created this log, talks about stress at the weekend with the wife, had to take kids to shows, competitions that the kids were doing shitloads of overtime. That's come up in the last couple of days with some of our Australian members doing crazy amounts of work right now. A few of our Australian other members have got COVID-like symptoms that seems to be doing the rounds at the minute. And that's because they're fucking human. One of the things that I like, and this would apply to Ultimate again, Steve, is you can come on and you could literally just create a post and have any of you use Ultima. I heard Steve and Mobster talking about it on the show. Is it as good a source as they say it is? And get human beings to tell you they've used it, what they did, the results that they had. And that's another reason why I recommend sources. As an example, again, Steve, we have had from time to time on Evolutionary 1 or 2 sources that had to go. And they had to go because they dropped the fucking ball. They started out awesome. They were great for years. They changed hands. Someone else took it over and the ball was dropped. And people complained, and Evolutionary bosses, moderators jumped on that straight. I've seen it done in days, Steve. Friday we're talking about it, Monday it's gone because they fucked up. Major issues, major complaints, money lost, products that were shit, and so on and so forth. And the moment a source drops the ball, the moment they aren't up to crack, they're not as good as they once was, or their fucking customers over, they're gone. That's human being stuff. That's not manipulated. That's not AI. That's us realizing there's a problem, seeing complaints from other human beings. I've had an abscess. I spent $10,000. These fuckers haven't brought me my product, and so on and so forth. That's human beings. And the reason for that is that we're able to recognize the good and the bad, the stuff that's no good, the stuff that isn't. Steve and I have lots and lots of experience going back decades. Lots of the people in our forums do. That's the reason why we're identified that companies like Ultima are fan-fucking-tastic. And it's just like Steve says, we'll know if it's too cheap, if it's too expensive, if it's high quality, should it be cloudy? And we know, because we see examples of this on a daily basis, that people have used Ultima, they've got great results, and that's the reason why we recommend companies like that, Steve. Please note, we are not doctors, and the opinions of ours is our view and based on our experience and views on the topic. A podcast is for informational purposes and entertainment only. The freedom of speech and the First Amendment applies.